All right, here we go. This will take about 10 minutes. Taln awoke from a dream of agony and screams. Two things occurred to him immediately. First, as a herald, he should not need to sleep. Second, as a herald, he definitely shouldn't dream. He frowned, sitting up, noting that he wore only a loincloth under the sheet. The last few days were a blur in his mind. He had come to the city. He remembered his arrival and his bursting in on some sort of feast or party. Beyond that, the sign hadn't worked. Taln hissed in surprise, thrusting forward his hand, trying to manifest the Nile bond. Nothing happened. Where were his powers, his stone warding? He analyzed his surroundings with a quick glance. He was in a long, rectangular chamber set with beds along both walls. Many of the beds were occupied with the lame and the sick, and the men tending them wore undyed tan robes, sewn with the glyph Ela, the mark of the priesthood. There were 2 doors leading out of the room, and the windows provided an alternative exit. They looked wide enough to be broken with relative ease. A table would probably do it. One of the attendants noticed that Taln was awake and waved over an older monk. They whispered in voices most men probably wouldn't have been able to hear, but Taln was not most men. "Where is Brother Lahan?" the elder monk hissed. "He should be here." "I'll fetch him," the younger monk promised, bowing his head in deference, then rushing off. The older man cleared his face of displeasure, instead smiling reassuringly toward Taln. He had a large nose and grizzled features, and his hands were calloused. "I see you finally awoke from your slumber, traveler." "Yes, Holy One," Taln replied. "Thank you for caring for me." He flexed his arm, testing his muscles against their extended immobility. "It seems I've been out of sorts these last few days. How long was I asleep?" 4 days, off and on. You were awake for much of the time, but you seemed unable to focus." 4 days? He could feel a faint weakness of the mind, whispers at the edge of his sanity. It was getting worse each return. "I must say, traveler, you seem far more lucid now than when they first brought you. What do you remember of yourself?" "Are you asking if I still think that I'm a herald?" "In not so many words." "My problems of the last few days were not related to my identity, Holy One. I am Talinel Elin, Herald of Battle. I will not lie to you. That would do us both a disservice." "I see. However, I don't expect you to believe me. The sign did, after all, fail. I'll have to solve that problem before I can move on to other items. For now, let it suffice to say that I was a traveler in need of your assistance and you provided it. The Almighty bless you for that." The monk smiled, glancing to the side as another brown-robed form, looking a bit disheveled, entered from the north hallway. "You are welcome to stay with us as long as you need, friend," the elderly monk said, gesturing toward the newcomer. "Brother Lahan has been assigned to care for you. He will travel with you and make certain you are acquainted with the city." In other words, he'll make certain I don't get into trouble, Taln thought, as the elder monk backed away to care for other patients. Taln was pleased to note that Brother Lahan was carrying a folded pile of clothing with him. Lahan was a younger man, probably in his early 20s, a bit on the pudgy side, with an unconcerned oval of a face. Lahan blinked tiredly as he approached, and his left cheek was still imprinted with the lines of whatever he'd been lying on when they awoke him. Lahan yawned as he pulled up a stool beside Taln's bed. "Greetings, traveler. Welcome to the glorious Mercy Home Monastery." "Thank you," Taln said, reaching immediately for the clothing. "I'm sorry they woke you." "It's my own fault. I've really got to find a better place to hide." Taln raised an eyebrow at the comment as he was examining the clothing. The cut was unfamiliar to him, though fashion changes between returns were normal. The most important article was the thick brown cloak, a piece of Risharan fashion that would never change. Cloaks were necessary, even in the summer, to ward off the high storm rains. "Brother Lahan," Taln said, "please run and fetch me some thread and a needle." "Excuse me?" "You and I are in a forced relationship. Your superiors obviously expect you to keep me from causing any serious trouble. If you want my cooperation in this, you're going to need to make yourself useful." "How very economical of you." "I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to save the world. A needle and some thread would be very helpful." Lahan rolled his eyes, rising from the stool. "All right. Oh, and bring me 4 rocks," Taln added, rising and beginning to dress. "About half the size of your fist." "Rocks?" Yes, rocks. This is Roshar. Last time I checked, which was admittedly several centuries ago, they were fairly common here. Rocks, Lahan mumbled as he walked off. Tong was dressed by the time Lahan returned. He accepted the thread, needle, and rocks from the monk, then proceeded to begin sewing a flap into the hem of his cloak. The monk sat down, regarding Tong with curiosity. The second thing I'm going to need from you, Brother Lahan, is information. Ask away. What year is it? 10E 980. Tom paused, needle halfway through a stitch. 980? Indeed, not that I pay much attention, but at least that's what they tell me the year is. 980? Nearly 1,000 years since the last return. Such a long time. Something must have happened to the Voidbringers. They had never waited that long between returns before. What happened to the Epoch Kingdoms? Taln asked, getting back to his sewing. Lahan didn't reply immediately. You're kidding, right? Pretend I'm not. They fell right after the beginning of the 10th epoch. Tong closed his eyes, sighing to himself. He'd hoped it wasn't true, but... What about Alethkar? He said, opening his eyes. It obviously still exists. Well, a lot of the epoch kingdoms exist in name. It's always a good idea to use one of the old names when you found a kingdom. It makes you seem more legitimate. Which ones still stand, then, even if only in name? Alethkar, of course, though, as the king told you, we've expanded a bit over the last few years. Thalena still stands. It's by itself on that island over there, so its borders stay pretty much stable. Vedenar is now called Yakaved, though it's ruled by 3 Veden houses with a figurehead as their leader. That's it? Well, Shinovar is still there. No one ever really pays much attention to them. Well, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Alethkar, Vedenar, and Thalena had always been among the most powerful of the 10. Vorinism is still strong, I assume, Tel noted, reaching for the rocks that Lahan had brought him. And always will be, almighty willing. Lahan said it in a dutiful tone, but his piousness was weakened slightly by the extended yawn he made in the middle of the sentence. If the Vorin religion is still in power, how is it that no one takes my claim to be a herald seriously? Have you forgotten about the cycle of returns, the coming of the Voidbringers? The religion was founded to prepare for these things. Well, we've kind of had to change our focus during the last epoch. You did, after all, promise that you weren't going to come back. What? At the end of the last return, the heralds disappeared and said they wouldn't be coming back. The cycle of returns was broken and the Voidbringers had been defeated. That's not possible. I wouldn't be here if the cycle of returns were over. Trust me. Which of the heralds proclaimed this? Lahan shrugged. You're kind of asking the wrong monk. Actually, the wrong monastery. The Order of Ishar contains all the history experts. This all happened 1,000 years ago, after all. But it's your theological heritage. So the senior monks are fond of telling me. Taln stood, putting on the cloak. You sewed rocks into your hem. How very odd of you. Taln spun, turning a few times to judge the motion of the cloak. Then he turned to the side in a quick movement, pulling the garment off with a smooth gesture. For weight, Taln explained. A weighted cloak is more easy to position in battle and more easy to remove with speed. He could also use it as a surprise weapon, though he didn't offer that bit of an explanation. Oh, Lahan said. What did you think I was doing? Taln asked with amusement, sitting down on the bed. I wasn't sure. I figured you were confused. You are after all, crazy. You're not a very subtle one, are you, Brother Lahan? I make up for it in sheer laziness. What are you doing now? Pockets, Taln said, setting out the cloak again. Do you mind if I cut up this blanket? Lahan shrugged. That's kind of the thing we might expect a crazy person to do, so go ahead. You'll have to tear it, though. I'm certainly not giving you a knife. Taln did so, beginning to work on the pockets. You seem surprisingly flippant with regard to my supposed lunacy. Aren't you afraid I'll become violent? You're not a violent one. I've seen a lot of your type come through the monastery. I also know you can't be talked out of who you think you are. My job is to make certain you don't accidentally hurt yourself or anyone else, or especially not me. You have experience with my type, then? I tend to get all of the more undesirable assignments. I wonder why, Tal mumbled. He fell silent as he worked, turning his thoughts to a topic he'd been avoiding. What was he going to do? Normally he would let the other heralds decide the plan, but he appeared to be the only one to have returned to reach the city. He needed to find the others, and that required one thing, his sword. It had been taken from him. He remembered that night at the feast only vaguely. My sword. It was confiscated, Lahan said. You didn't exactly make a good impression on the king. Enduring, perhaps, but not good. There was a woman, Talon said thoughtfully. She saved my life. Lady Yasna, Lahan agreed. The king's sister. Don't assume she protected you out of fondness. Lady Yasna is about as compassionate as a sleeping chol. Even her breathing is politically motivated. No one's certain why she pled for you, but most think it to be some kind of political stunt. Either way, I owe her my life, Talon said. The loss of his weapon was troubling. With it, he could sense the locations of the other heralds. Assuming, of course, he thought, that the blade's powers still work. Tom paused. A feeling of dread struck him. Stone warding didn't work, and he couldn't manifest the Nile bond. If he lost the sword as well... The window light turned red. Tom gasped, feeling dizzy, and an expression of concern actually crossed the monk's face. Are you all right? Lahan asked. The monk burst into flames. The windows melted. Blood-red fire ripped up the sides of the building, pooling at the top and bearing down on Talon with its heat. Smoke rose from suddenly ignited beds, curling ominously, bringing with it screams. Sudden, formless screams that came from the far edge of the room. Fire roared, and something moved within it, something dark. The screams mounted, pulsing in his ears, searing him, flaying him. What's wrong? Lahan asked, still in flames, his flesh melting from his face. Tom closed his eyes, grabbing the sides of the bed, pushing the screams away. He shivered, exhaling in a long, demanding sigh. When Talon opened his eyes, the room had returned to normal. He sat for a few moments, breathing deeply. I'm fine, Talon finally said, forcing himself to stand and look at his new cloak. It had one large pocket, two smaller ones, and a small ribbon at the back to hold a hidden dagger, if he ever managed to get his hands on one. I assume I'm allowed to leave the monastery. As long as you take me with you, Lahan replied, but you're kind of expected to go to work in the royal mines to help pay for your keep. But no one is going to force me? Well, no. Good, Talon said, throwing on his cloak. We're leaving then. Where are we going? To get some answers. We will end there. So, thank you guys once again. We're just going to move to the signing part now. I'm going to have this microphone over here. They'll tell you how to do that. I look forward to seeing you as you come through the line.